where he played the primary role in developing commercial client relationships and helped lay the groundwork for an urban forestry consulting department here. Joe specializes in assisting communities, universities, municipalities, real estate developers, landscape professionals, and other primary stakeholders in devising, developing, and implementing urban forest solutions. He has an MIP from the School of Public Affairs, International Affairs, University of Georgia, and a BA from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He is a International Society of Arboriculture board certified master arborist and holds a tree risk assessment qualification, as well as first aid. So if we need some help there, I don't know if that's going to work remotely, Joe, but so a lot to offer. And so with that, I am going to hand it off to Joe.
Thank you, Andy. Hopefully this presentation today doesn't get anybody so excited that they require any first aid. But I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and looking forward to discussing a little bit about tree inventories and canopy cover assessments, and specifically how inventories and canopy cover assessments can assist in the context of trees and storms, so the readiness, response, and recovery. A little bit about me, which Andy already went over, and just a little bit about Davey Resource Group. So I'm sure most of here are familiar with Davey Tree. Davey Resource Group began in '92. We're a division of Davey Tree, and now Davey Resource Group is a wholly owned subsidiary company, but still part of Davey Tree family. And we are an environmental consulting firm. And so I am a associate consultant for Davey Resource Group, and my focus is urban forestry, particularly urban forestry as it relates to North and South Carolina. And we have extensive experience on tree inventories as well as canopy assessments, and using inventories and canopy assessments as tools in helping communities develop management plans and master plans. Specifically in North Carolina, again, urban forestry and GIS work, and we also handle some land management type services with our group down in Wilmington, North Carolina, and a team in Raleigh does everything from wetland delineation and wetland mitigation to banking, as well as invasive species control. So we're here today to discuss tree inventory 101 as it relates to storms. And so why do a tree inventory? Well, trees are assets and storms can damage your assets. And the goal is to manage a resource to mitigate potential damage from storms. So inventories will help promote effective asset management. And so there's multiple types of inventories, and we will focus more on some types than others. To give you a brief introduction, we have a sample inventory, a sample just being a study area as a representative subsection of a larger area. So if you've got 100 miles of streets, maybe you inventory trees located along 5% to 10% of those streets, and then use what you find to extrapolate that out to the maintenance needs and budget needs of the entire community. A limited scope inventory, so that could just be looking for specific things. So for example, a level 1 inventory, just driving around and looking for what to your trained eye or to the arborist trained eye might be a hazard. Pull over, park the car, get out, and inspect the tree further. And then we have a complete inventory, which is inventorying every tree within a management zone. And for a management zone, could be a block, could be a county, could be a city. In general, when we're talking about complete tree inventories as it relates to municipalities, we're looking at a complete tree inventory, meaning all of the trees that are public trees within the municipal bounds. So just a quick poll, just to kind of get a feel for the audience here today. So the poll is simply, do you have a tree inventory?
All right, it is live. We'll just give everybody a few seconds to respond with yes or no. There's a couple of options in there. If it's what kind of inventory, sample inventory, a limited scope inventory, or a complete inventory. Just give everybody just another 5 or 10 seconds to get their responses in, and then I'll share the results. Just do your best to see if what your community has. Let's see. All right. So it looks like we got most everybody responding. So I will share those results here. So it looks like 42% of everybody on here does have an inventory that falls in the limited scope inventory. Only 16% of the folks on the call today have a complete inventory. 1 or 2 of you say you have an inventory, but you're not sure what kind, and 32% say they do not have an inventory of any kind that they're aware of.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for getting that poll handled for me, Leslie. I appreciate that. And I remember from Wednesday's poll, I think that there's a percentage of people in the group here that are not representing a municipality. So it seems like the no 32%, I guess there should have been NA as one of those options. But the good news is that a majority of us here today do have a tree inventory, have experience with tree inventories. And so I guess, how can a tree inventory help when it comes to storm readiness and storm response and storm recovery? So to talk on a bit more detail about a sample tree inventory, so a sample tree inventory is what it sounds like. You're taking a sample of your tree resource, and when you have a centrally planned community, a sample inventory could be very useful in that most of what you sample is going to be representative of the entire, the part is likely to be representative of the whole. So I know here in North Carolina, particularly in some of the less developed parts of North Carolina, we definitely do not have centrally planned communities, and sample inventories are still applicable and still useful. They just become a little bit more heavy lifting needing to be done on the front end in terms of work to get an appropriate sample, which is something that for us, our GIS team handles. And there's a methodology similar to the iTree Streets methodology, if you're familiar with iTree, that can help you set that up. I don't want to get too much into the nitty-gritty detail of that, but sample inventories are great for communities that do not have the infrastructure in terms of personnel to handle a complete tree inventory, and they're great for forecasting, how much work there is to do in the municipality, and therefore good for planning purposes and for procuring future funding. So if you do an inventory of possibly 5% of your streets and comes back that you have 200 trees that need priority maintenance, then if you've set the inventory up properly, then you've really got about, throughout the city, the municipality, 4,000 trees that need priority maintenance. So it is a good tool for quickly getting a feel for what a fully fleshed out urban forestry program could look like and how much it would cost. And typically these samples are set up so that you can go back and resample them. So if you have a storm event come through and you have already done a sample tree inventory, then in the recovery stage of the storm event, you could go back out, resample, re-inventory your existing samples. And then again, the idea is that you would be able to get a sense for, what the effect of the storm had on a community-wide level just by looking at your sample inventory plots. Talk a little bit about a limited scope inventory. So an example here on the screen is a project that I was part of in Nashville, Tennessee, and looking for ash trees and located within parks. So, and ash trees and hazard trees. And so it's an example of a limited scope. We're not inventorying every tree that the city of Nashville owns. We're inventorying, specific trees, ash trees or hazard trees. So again, limiting the scope. And as it relates to storm readiness, a limited scope inventory is highly useful. It's just as simple as level 1 tree inventory, driving in your vehicle, windshield inventory, stopping, identifying the trees that look like they could be a hazard and getting out and doing more investigation. And the idea is to mitigate any potential risk and hazard. And a limited scope inventory is again useful in the response stage and the readiness stage. And the response stage, you could get out and do your level 1 drive through and just identify the most pressing concerns. After the most pressing concerns are handled, you could once again get out and then look for the longer term needs. So there's multiple applications an inventory has to prepare you for the storm event and prepare you on the front end and then prepare you to recover afterwards. And then there's a complete tree inventory, which again is just an entire management area. Sorry, my mouse seems to be hypersensitive today. It's blowing through slides. And so this is a project I was a part of and inventoried 120,000 trees in Baltimore. And so when you have a city like Baltimore that has the in-house staff capabilities to handle a complete tree inventory, it can help you in long-term management planning and master planning. So when you're selecting your tree inventory, there's some key questions you would want to ask yourself. So why, what, how, and who? And in the context of storms, so why are you considering a tree inventory? Well, we're considering a tree inventory to prepare our community for the increasing severity of storm events. So what are your goals, needs, and challenges? Those will be community specific. I've found that they're often related to budget, staffing. A lot of communities do not have the luxury of an in-house tree crew, so they have to contract it out. And how do you intend to use the data? And that is how you're going to use the data should inform what data you collect. You don't want to spend time or money collecting unnecessary data. You want to make sure that your data is reliable, consistent, accurate, clear, easy to use. And then you need to consider who will collect the data. Is it going to be in-house, the municipal arborists? Are you going to try and work with volunteers? Or are you going to contract it out? So there's key questions you need to ask yourself before going down the path of the tree inventory. So another thing to consider is where your community currently falls on what we call the urban forest program continuum. And so a tree inventory, whether it's a complete inventory, a sample inventory, or maybe just a limited scope inventory. You know, that is usually a prerequisite for a storm response plan. And so if you've got a tree inventory, then it sounds like you've probably got an important element that you need to put a storm response plan into place if you do not have one already. And so again, let's set up your data fields to define your goals and objectives, and just some common data fields that will be helpful for any inventory, specifically an inventory with an eye towards storm risk mitigation. You want your geospatial information, your addressing information, species, diameter, condition, and most importantly, a recommended maintenance. So we're trying to identify and mitigate risk. So these are some other data fields that you might want to consider. The good news is that the North Carolina Forest Service has on their website samples of scopes of sample requests for proposals that municipalities can look to for helping develop one that fits their community's needs. And I believe there's one for both a limited scope, like a risk inventory, and then there's one for a sample inventory. So that resource is available for you, and consulting arborists will also be able to help you apply the principles of a tree inventory to your community in order to, every community is different and has different goals, different, internal politics. And so an important aspect in the planning phase is to make sure that you're considering all of, the iniquities of the individual municipality. And so I ran through that real quick. And so I'm going to stop now for any questions specifically related to inventories. And then I've got a few more minutes. I'm going to run through, quick urban tree canopy assessments and how they could be useful for you on the storm response, readiness, and recovery. But any questions right now on anything, whenever any confusion on inventories?
Okay, well, we'll give folks just a minute to type in any questions you might have for Joe on the tree inventory portion of his presentation. Just type your question in that panel box. I'm not seeing any, but if you do have any, you can type them in there. I'll just give them a minute, and then if I don't see any pop up, I'll let you kind of continue on to the next part of your presentation. Let's see.
All right, sure. Well, we'll just go ahead and move.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
And so I guess the second poll is just same idea with the tree inventory. Do you have a canopy assessment? Just trying to get a feel for where the audience is at. Made this one pretty simple. Yes.
Yep, I posted that one. Just give them a couple of seconds to fill it out. I'll let you know when it's closed. And just yes, no. Do you have an urban tree canopy assessment? Give them just a few more seconds to get their responses in. All right, getting most everybody's responses in, so I will go ahead and close and share the results. So it looks like, unfortunately, 64% of the folks on the call today do not have an urban forestry canopy assessment. 36 responded with yes, they do have a canopy assessment of some kind.
Okay. That's more than I thought would have a canopy assessment, so that's good. That's definitely good. So it looks like we've got a pretty good group here in terms of the tools and their toolbox available. I like canopy. I think canopy assessments are great, and they're not often thought of first off when you're thinking, okay, well, what can help me be ready for a storm, and what can help me respond to or recover from a storm? But there's a lot of different applications for an urban tree canopy assessment. So I'm going to just run through an overview, show you some different types of analyses that can be done, and some types that would be good to consider for storm response. So urban tree canopy assessment is, assessing the layer of leaves, branches, and stems that cover the ground when viewed from above. It's generally done through GIS, remote sensing, and satellite imagery. And you make a lot of great maps and great pictures and learn a lot of information, because there's all sorts of different layers of information that you can overlay on top of your assessment and kind of drill down into your community and figure and target specific areas of your tree resource in your community. So this is sort of a very basic GIS-based urban tree canopy assessment we're looking at right here. Land cover, 5 types of land cover: tree canopy, impervious surface, grass, bare soil, and open water. This community, for reference, is Syracuse, Michigan. I was part of the project that we did for that community there that did a lot of UTC analysis. So you have your land cover, and then you have your canopy cover. And so the canopy cover can be looked at in many different ways. You can look at the canopy cover by parcel, by census block. So you can stratify it. If you had a management zones, so say your community was divided into geographic management zones, you could overlay your management zones, and you could assess the canopy cover within each management zone, and you might find out management zone 1 doesn't have hardly any canopy. So that's a priority for planting, which would be, more trees would help mitigate storms, the runoff from storms. Then you might find management zone 3, for example, has 60% canopy. So you know that when a storm rolls through, management zone 3 is going to need a lot of work. So if your responsibility is maintaining canopy along right-of-way, then you can do a canopy assessment of your right-of-way, and then you might be able to figure out, well, these are going to be my right-of-way hotspots for when a storm rolls through. And I got a couple more examples of that further down. And you can use canopy assessment to look at land use. You can stratify across all different types of land use. And so all of these different types of analyses can then be overlaid on top of each other. And so you can just cross-reference all sorts of different demographics. You can find in, areas where, census blocks have low canopy and contain X percentage of, people below demographic, where the census blocks demographics are, look at income, gender, ethnicity, etc. You can look at canopy change. So canopy change could be a very effective tool for assessing how a storm has impacted your community. It's not something that you would likely be able to do in the immediate aftermath of a storm, since it's dependent on imagery. So say a hurricane rolled through a year or 2 ago, now there's a new satellite imagery out there, then you could get a change assessment, and you would be able to target, to kind of figure out before and after how that storm had an impact on your tree resource. And so you can also use your UTC to look at Canopy Health. And so this is useful in all stages of storm preparedness, storm response, and recovery. You'll know, so if you get one of these done pre-storm, then certain areas. It's like, so this map that we're looking at here is like a heat map. So the yellow, orange, and red are places where it's been identified as having canopy in poor condition, trees that are in poor condition. So, a canopy assessment could inform a limited scope inventory as well. So you get a canopy assessment, you figure out, all right, well, we've got, some groups of poor trees, dead trees, fair trees. We need to get a better idea of what's going on there. And so then you're able to narrow down the area of interest for an inventory. And when a storm does hit, then you'll also have an idea of where there could possibly be more damage and more debris. And same idea here. It's another example of the canopy. On the right side is another example of canopy by right-of-way. And on the left side is similar. There are slightly different specs on that one, but again, canopy by right-of-way. And so if you take something like you say you have a GIS data layer for utilities, like overhead utilities, then you can take an analysis like this and then overlay your utility data layer, and then areas where you have high concentrations of canopy right on top of overhead power lines, that should be part of your in your initial response phase of going out and looking at and assessing damage. Then some certain areas that you might want to get a look at first, or alert the utility company and the sake of power lines. But I think you get the example is that you are able to target specific areas for further investigation. And stormwater is the same concept. You can prioritize, you can create, so the left side here is a priority map for stormwater risk. Then on the bottom right is a little bit of behind the scenes look of how we weight the different factors that play into creating that map. So you can assign different weights to different factors and really tailor your stormwater map to your community's individual needs. So it'll alert you to areas that are prone to flooding, and you can look at your catchment basements, and you can even overlay this catchment basement UTC catchment basin. Can't say that word today. Catchment basin analysis with the stormwater risk analysis. And so, what you might find is certain areas with high stormwater risk in heavy usage catchment basin, and then that's going to stimulate further investigation to figure out how to mitigate. And, trees are great at mitigating stormwater. I think you see that picture up there on the top right. I think I took that picture 2 years ago in Durham. I was parked on the side of the street, just doing some work in the car. Started raining, and that was about, I think, like 15 or 20 minutes of really heavy rain created what you're seeing right there. So stormwater can be a big problem. Right there is a large field. So that would be an example of somewhere you could plant trees to, over the long term, possibly mitigate the this runoff that you're seeing here. A urban tree canopy assessment would identify this area based on remote sensing. So I think I got an example of that up here, right here. So this is two types of analysis to kind of really drill down into where to plant canopy in order to mitigate against the potential effects of stormwater runoff. Example in the table on the left shows you the weight given to different variables. And then, so the picture in the middle you're seeing there is the entire city and the different areas, geographic areas of the city are prioritized by, where the community needs to plant first. And then the picture on the right-hand side is going even deeper, where we take those moderate, high, and very high priority planting levels and then see, okay, where can we plant small trees, medium maturing trees, and large maturing trees, and then further prioritizes. So then okay, well, so the ultimate goal here is we want to mitigate stormwater runoff. Well, then let's target planting efforts first at where we can maximize large maturing canopy trees that are rated as very high priority. That makes sense. And so you see a cluster of it there on the right-hand side, center, I guess the east central portion of the city. And by the way, that's Buchanan, Michigan. But you see there's a lot of impervious surface there. I think there's a stream, a river on the right-hand side running down there. So that is an area identified as plant here to mitigate the effects of storm events, particularly heavy rain storm events. And then there are software solutions available to take your inventories and take your Canopy assessments, put them all in one place, and then you have the ability to play around and see, what's happening. And, I'm at my 31-minute mark now, so I will only spend a very brief second on this. Is everyone able to see that the new screen that I just popped up there?
Yeah, we are, Joe.
Yeah. All right, perfect. So this is just a very brief example. I love this tool, but everything that I just said and went through, we were looking at in static maps. All of these layers can be loaded onto onto a software, and then you can use this software and just kind of observe what's going on, or you could take your layers, you can prioritize, you can set your own prioritizations. You can look at planting, so where could, census blocks with, low canopy, you can just prioritize the different areas using your data. And then I'm not able to pull it up right this second, but this particular piece of software, also you're able to take your inventory data and you can overlay your inventory data with your Canopy assessment data, and then from there you can get a sense of even further prioritize your areas of response. So that is a very brief overview of two tools in your tool belt to help you with your storm planning, storm readiness, your storm response, and then your long-term storm recovery. It's actually a coincidence that someone else within Data Resource Group, our market manager out of Michigan, happens to be giving a similar presentation that may be helpful. It's not going to be storm focused, but it will be focused on prioritizing maintenance based on level 1 risk assessments. So the drive-bys that I mentioned, how to use sample inventories to extrapolate to the total population. So you'll get some more in-depth explanation of the sample inventories. And, when the money's tight, where should you start? What are your options? And I guess, we're calling it why you don't need a tree inventory, just because to emphasize that a complete tree inventory is not necessary for effective urban forest management. It's helpful, but it's not necessary. So you can accomplish a lot of needs with your hazard and sample tree inventories. So I can get to, if anyone's interested in that, I can get to Leslie details on where you can sign up for that. And, with that, only 4 minutes over my time. Thank you. I hope it was somewhat helpful or very helpful, depending on who you are.
Oh, no, thank you, Joe. Exactly what we were looking for, an overview of the inventory options that we kind of discussed as tools in both urban forest management, but we're particularly focused here on readiness, response, and recovery. So thank you. So I think Leslie, thanks again, Joe. And yeah, if you can get us some of that information about that additional workshop, we